Some things in life which are so good can simultaneously be just as bad. One example is Outriders from developers People Can Fly and published by Square Enix. In this review, I hope to help you as to whether or not you should pick up this game, which is priced at $59.99 US. Welcome everyone, this is Wes from Against the Grain Gaming, and this is my review for Outriders on PC. For this review, I am running it on my Corsair Vengeance, which has an Intel i7-9700 CPU running at 3.0 GHz, with also 16 gigs of RAM installed. As for the GPU, I am running the RTX 2070 Super. When running this game, I put my actual display options all the way on Ultra throughout most of my experience, and I was getting around 120 frames per second. There were a few dips when more enemies were introduced into the different combat arenas or environments that I was exploring. However, it was running at a pretty consistent rate. There were some stuttering issues during slight interactions within bosses or within loading into a new area. However, I also have been reading that that was an actual bug that's been in the game, so I'm not sure if it's actually my computer. I think it might be more on the development side of this. Overall, I will say that this game ran pretty smoothly, and you should be able to see that through the gameplay. When I first dropped into the game for my first playthrough, I was really blown away by the different locations, gore, and physics. The developers did an excellent job designing some of the many locations you will visit. It was nice to look in the far distance to see some different locations you work to make your way to, such as a large volcano or a medical facility in the first city. Although the vistas can be easily overlooked because you'll be spending most of your time looking at the enemies and taking them out using your abilities and weapons. This is also an area which I loved. It was really awesome to see enemies explode, freeze, vaporize, or even spray blood all around the battlefield. Even though 30 hours in, I'm still loving the visual effects. It was also really impressive on how the physics work with the majority of enemies' reactions to being blown away by my character's actions. Then there were the character models. When watching the many cutscenes of the campaign, each character had a stiffness to his or her facial expressions. This also carried over to their movements when interacting with the environment. Every character moved around as if they wore a huge suit of armor. This stiffness carries over also into the gameplay. Before I get into the negatives of the gameplay, I want to put it out there that I really love this game, and I plan to continue to play. It felt so satisfying to be hunted down by a horde of enemies where I could then pull out a close quarters weapon to suppress their advancements, then quickly move to a group of enemies, slow them down inside my bubble, and then blast away at their health while I see the incoming bullets being stopped by the shield that protects me and slows all others. It's that moment-to-moment action which kept me playing and thinking about investing more hours into this game after each session. Then there is the loot itself. There were a number of times when I picked up a new weapon or armor piece which gave me a slight advantage which led me to the victory over any encounter. It did not take many time to grind an area or redo a lot of quests. The difficulty was all managed by the world tier system. Every new location was broken into a number of checkpoints. My goal was to complete the battle and then unlock the next location via a checkpoint which may have been opening a door, breaking a new path to travel, or climbing some objects. In order to increase the level of world tier, I had to successfully survive each encounter and activate the checkpoints. When working through the main campaign, there is a blue bar which shows your character's level and a gold bar which shows your world tier. When killing each enemy, you will see both bars increase, but the amount is only added on if you survive. As you level up your character and world tier, new ones are unlocked which add modifiers to the game. Mostly the modifiers increase the level of enemies on the battlefield. For instance, I played a lot of my character's first playthrough on world tier 8. This meant that the enemies' levels were increased by 5 above the level I was at during any point in the game. Also, all gear which was dropped had a potential of dropping up to 5 levels above my character's level. This all worked well throughout most of my first campaign. However, bosses tended to be a complete chore. This is where the game started to show its holes when it came to gameplay. I started playing the game as a trickster, a character built to get up close and personal with the enemy, and after I killed my adversaries, I gained additional health and a shield bar. This worked well when facing the hordes of enemies because I had plenty of targets to keep my shield increasing and regaining health at the same time. When facing bosses, however, that was another story. Since I needed kills to regain health and shields, I was stuck to only using the health I first started with until the end of the battle, or until my enemies came to aid the boss. About half of the boss battles were just me versus the boss. This led to many deaths and frustrating moments since I had no way to regain health or recharge my shield. This was only the beginning of my frustration. Going back to the checkpoint system, I really think it was broken in a way due to the fact that some of the checkpoint locations were too far from one another. I found myself battling a few waves of enemies, then encountering a mini-boss which would end up killing me. Once I reloaded, I had to then take out the same group of enemies, which some of the waves lasted up to 3 minutes. A simple checkpoint in between the waves and the mini-boss would make it a lot less stressful and keep the pace where I didn't feel like I was encountering the same content a number of times until I finally defeat the mini-boss. This also meant that I had to watch or at least skip through the cutscenes which introduced many of the bosses and mini-bosses over and over. The cutscenes were also a huge issue with this game. Every time you were opening a door, jumping a gap, swinging down a rope, or sliding between a rock formation, there was a cutscene. The reason it was there was to load in the new area. Seeing this every 3 to 5 minutes of gameplay became tiresome. This was a lazy way to load in a new area. Instead of having a cutscene, all the developers would have to do is blend it in with the game and make it seem as though it was happening in real time. Cutscenes were not the only thing which took me out from the gameplay experience. The worst of all were game crashes. Since playing this game, I've had over a dozen game crashes. Mostly the game would crash when leaving the inventory screen or loading into a new game with another player. My friend and I even had a 2-for-1 crash. My game crashed first because I exited the inventory screen. Since I was the host, my friend's game crashed, leaving us both having to boot the game back up in order to continue playing. There were also server issues which plagued the game for the first couple of days after launch. However, I haven't had any server issues lately, and I hope the development team can work on patching the issues with crashes. This leads me to think that the game was not completely finished before launch. This is also noticeable in its story. I've left the story for this later section of the review because it was mostly an afterthought for me while playing the game. Since this is a looter shooter, I spend most of my time doing just that, shooting and obtaining loot. Well, the story starts off with you, your fellow Outriders, and some colonists who have the job of continuing the survival of the human race on the planet of Onark, because Earth was no longer habitable. 2 ships came to the planet, each with 500,000 colonists, but one of the ships, the Carvel, exploded before leaving Earth. Your ship, the Florist, successfully made it, and it's up to you and the others to work to build a new world. That, however, is cut short because of the anomaly, which is an energy storm which can vaporize any living thing that comes in contact with it. Luckily for you and some others, the anomaly can also change the DNA of living species, which the species can then use the power of the anomaly like a magical power. Your character is struck through and then put into cryosleep until a cure can be found. After 31 years, your character is awoken to a civil war which has been raging for years after his or her sleep. Your character then discovers that they have this magical power called the anomaly, and they use it to help them survive. When meeting with other characters from the past, your character then works to help find and stop the anomaly, the war, and find a new habitable location on the planet for the remaining survivors. The campaign can last anywhere from 10 to 20 plus hours. It took me around 20 hours to complete because I was playing mostly on World Tier 8. The story has many main quests and side quest missions which lead you to a few memorable moments, like helping save a logger who was stuck in a porta potty and rescuing some soldiers who ended up becoming brainwashed by some cult leader. However, there were not a lot of gripping characters. Many characters die shortly after you meet them. Others are only in the story just to complete a few quests. Then the main cast just seems to hate the world they live in, have little hope, and just have little to no story to tell. It wasn't just the story which fell flat. Both the male and female voice actors delivered lines which felt out of character from what was happening on screen. At most, it was passable because your character could just say a sarcastic line or two. Fortunately for me, I just wanted to keep moving on to the next gunfight. At this point in time, I say this game is a 6 out of 10 because of the many crashes, large number of fade to black cutscreens, and balancing issues with certain characters. At this point, if you are on the fence about picking up this game, I would wait for a sale or wait for the developers to work on the previously mentioned issues. If this game's issues are refined, I would end up giving this game an 8 out of 10 for replayability, looting, and some awesome moment-to-moment gameplay.